Shabbat Shalom. There are some fascinating new studies of the brain that relate to our capacities to exercise willpower and self-control. Researchers tell us that there is a physiology of willpower. Now, this makes sense to me. There's a physiology to everything: love, hate, affection, envy, worry, anxiety. It stands to reason that all of these have physiological causes and effects. Something happens in the chemistry of our bodies that affects these moods and behaviors. A recent theory asserts that willpower, or what we may describe in religious terms, free will, is directly impacted by the amount of glucose in our bloodstream. According to psychologist Roy Baumeister, willpower is a form of mental energy powered by glucose in the bloodstream. But here's the thing. The more we use our willpower, he says, the more we deplete it. In other words, if we work hard to avoid putting on those extra pounds between Thanksgiving and Hanukkah, we will deplete the reserves of our willpower so that when the next test of will occurs, like avoiding maxing out our credit cards, we will have little powers of resistance left. We will have used up our mental energy so that we will have little left to call upon. The solution, physiologically speaking, is to consume more glucose so that our capacities to resist consuming more glucose may increase. So the next time that you want to avoid eating that delicious chocolate cake, eat chocolate cake beforehand. Raise the level of glucose in your bloodstream, and you'll be fine. Researchers tracked Israeli judges and determined that they almost never granted parole immediately before a meal. But after a meal, they granted parole 65% of the time. So if you ever find yourself in jail, feed the judge before she makes a decision on your parole. Now, all of this is fine. I'm not against physiology, and I'm not against science. Science can never contradict religion. Science is a tool of religion. Science helps explain religious assertions. If there is a contradiction, either the science is wrong, or if the science is right, the religious idea must be wrong. Only ignoramuses reject evidence of evolution. Only fundamentalists disfigure reason and twist themselves into theological contortions every time a dinosaur bone is discovered. For me, I go to doctors to tell me what is wrong with me, rather than rely on miracles. If the science is right, I'll take the vaccine every time. But it is one thing to use science as a tool for progress and understanding. It is quite another thing to put all of our eggs in the basket of science. Science is science. It's not a god. Some of us have made science into the new deity. In the name of rejecting the false gods of religion, we dance around the golden calf of science and prostrate ourselves at its feet, proclaiming, "This is our God, O people of the 21st century. Bow down and pay homage." It's one thing to study the connection between glucose and willpower and to assign it some importance. It's quite another thing to determine that willpower is all about physiology. The physiology can explain, justify, and resolve any behavior. First, because we know very little about physiology in comparison to what could be known. Anyone who has found themselves in a hospital or has found their loved one in a hospital knows that while modern medicine is amazing, There are so many physiological matters that we simply do not know enough about. Doctors do not tell us what will happen with certainty. They give us probabilities. That is all. And second, human beings are not merely physiological creatures. We are much more than that. Is it the case that everything about us, everything, even our willpower, even our free will to choose and make decisions is explained by physiology? Is it the case that everything about social life, crime, law, charity, intellectual accomplishment, self-control, everything can be explained by physiology? The solution to crime is glucose in the bloodstream. A study in Finland revealed that by looking at the glucose tolerance of convicts about to be released, future violent crimes could be predicted by 80% accuracy. So you mean we can devise a glucose pill and mandate that every freed criminal take it daily for 5 years? This should cut down the crime of paroled Finnish prisoners by 80%. If we take this stuff too far, we run the risk of turning ourselves into mere physiological machines that can be reverse engineered by science. Sorry, I committed the crime, but it's not my fault. The devil made me do it. I was born that way. Nature, heredity, hardened my heart. I have no control over my impulses. I didn't get enough glucose at home. If we take science too far, we run the risk of not only depleting our willpower, we also run the risk of depleting the moral basis of life itself. A brain that is physiologically unable to resist temptation is a brain empty of moral judgment and responsibility. If we have no control physiologically, if it was nature that distorted our brain circuitry, then what is the extent of my moral responsibility? Now, to be fair, the authors of the study are not suggesting that we have no control. They urge us to achieve willpower by exercising the willpower muscle, by repeating behaviors that eventually turn into habit. To lose weight, they say, try making small incremental changes rather than over time become a habit, rather than going on a strict radical diet. I have no quarrel with this. Judaism is big on developing good habits too. I do, however, quarrel with a biologically deterministic worldview. Heredity is destiny. Judaism insists that we have free will. It's true that heredity bestowed upon us inclinations. Environment, too, influences us in fundamental ways. Some of us might be more susceptible to excesses of alcohol, food, shopping, or other temptations. Some of us have not had healthy childhood environments that others have had. But most of us, no matter how we were raised or what is our physiology, are able to exercise free will, willpower. And it is this freedom to choose that is the foundation of moral reasoning. Otherwise, what is the moral culpability of the street criminal? Or even an arch criminal like Stalin? It's true, 30% of abused children abuse their own children. But 70% don't. I rebel against a deterministic philosophy of life, whether rooted in science or religion. I rebel against the idea that heredity or God predetermined every aspect of my life. I agree with Maimonides. If one desires to turn himself to the path of good and be righteous, the choice is his. Should he desire to turn to the path of evil, the choice is his. It is not that Judaism ignores heredity or environment as heavy influences on us, for good and bad. The Mishnah emphasizes, stay away from a bad neighbor and don't associate with an evil person. Why? because environment can and often does influence our behavior, for better and worse. But that's the point. For most of us, it is our decision to associate with a bad neighbor. And for those who have no choice, like children raised in terrible environments, Judaism points to Abraham, who was raised in an idolatrous household, and Moses, who was raised in the palace of the evil Pharaoh. We have the capacity to resist. We have free will. God said to Cain before he murdered his brother Abel, "Sin crouches at the door, and its urge is towards you, but you can be its master. If you do right," said God, "there is uplift." That's the point. Mastering our impulses, exercising free will, doing right. Free will is the essential component of the very composition that makes us human. The more we use it to choose right, the more there is uplift. We do not deplete our reserves of free will. We continuously enhance these reserves and strengthen them. Otherwise, we are mere physiological machines, animals that have higher brain capacities than a lion, but no higher moral expectation or aspiration. To kill a person is like a lion killing a deer, all brain functioning and impulses as designed by nature. Jacob, in this week's Torah portion, struggles with the same issue. Upon his return to the land of Israel, after 20 years of exile, his brother Esau is waiting for him. Esau has been tricked out of the birthright and the blessing all those years ago, and Jacob isn't sure whether he's waiting to kill him. Esau in Jewish tradition represents raw animal power. He was a hunter, all testosterone, all impulse, no willpower. After moving his family across the river, we read that Jacob was left alone. And then suddenly some kind of force, a divine messenger, grabs Jacob and wrestles with him through the night. He prevails, or at least is not defeated. As the sun rises, in exchange for being released, the divine messenger blesses Jacob and changes his name to Israel, which is why to this day the Jewish people are called Israel. You have struggled with divine beings and human beings and have prevailed. I view this struggle as largely an internal struggle. The key phrase for me is that Jacob was left alone. In other words, he was struggling with himself. He was struggling with his conscience. He who had been so selfish and miserly and egotistical in his youth, could he prevail and overcome these natural impulses and leave the world of Esau behind in favor of a higher existence? You have struggled with divine beings and human beings. This is our struggle. To acknowledge the power of nature and nurture, the impact of glucose in our bloodstream and the power of in the environment to shape our makeup, but to master these baser impulses, to struggle for higher purposes and higher meanings, to struggle with the divine being of our nature, and to prevail.